all started, like a scene in shadows deep within my mind. My name is Jonah, and this is the tale of how my fascination with the occult led me to the brink of madness and beyond. The idea came to me on a dreary October evening. The winds were whispering through the cracked windows of my cramped apartment, carrying with them a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I had been reading about ancient sigils and protective wards all afternoon. The notion of binding a spirit for protection was ancient and is often seen in folklore spanning cultures. But what if I pondered, someone dared to bind a spirit of vengeance and chouse instead of protection? A daemon, Percy, to bend at one's will. Driven by a reckless urge that I'd later come to regret, I decided I would be that someone. My tools were simple: ink, needles, and an old book of arcane knowledge I had bought from an online auction. The book was tattered, its pages yellowed with age, but the sigil I needed was clear, a fierce, jagged design that seemed to pulse with a dark life as I sketched it onto my skin. The pain of the needle was nothing compared to the thrill of the forbidden dance I was about to partake in. Each drop of ink that penetrated my skin was a step closer to the otherworldly power I yearned to wield. As the final curve was drawn, the air around me grew dense, electric with unspoken words in a language not meant for human ears. That night, the boundaries between worlds blurred. I remember waking to a pressure on my chest, heavy as if the air itself conspired to crush me. Through the dim moonlight filtering in through the window, I saw it, the demon I had summoned. It was more horrifying than any illustration or description in my books. Its eyes, deep burning red eyes, seemed to pull at the essence of my soul, and its form shifted and twisted in the shadows, never fully revealing itself. I thought I had prepared for this. I believed the sigil on my arm would bind it to my will, but I was wrong. The demon had no intention of being a mere servant. It laughed, a sound that filled the room with malice and dread.
Fool.
It hissed, its voice a chorus of nightmares.
You sought to bind me, but you have only bound yourself to my whim.
From that night on, my life became a living horror. The demon toyed with me, appearing at will, manipulating shadows into grotesque forms that whispered threats and omens. My nights were sleepless, filled with the echoes of its laughter and the constant prickle of unseen eyes watching me from the darkness. As days turned into weeks, my health and sanity began to wane. Friends and family grew concerned, but how could I explain that I was haunted by a creature from the very depths of hell itself? No one would believe me. I was alone with my tormentor. My apartment, once a humble refuge from the outside world, turned into a prison of paranoia and fear. The demon's presence was constant, an oppressive weight that never left the back of my mind. It began to manifest more physically. Objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut in the dead of night, and chilling whispers that seemed to come from right beside me. One evening, I reached my breaking point. The room grew inexplicably cold as I sat at my desk, trying futilely to distract myself with work. My breath turned to mist, and the lights flickered ominously. Then, all at once, every book on my shelves hurled themselves to the floor, their pages flapping wildly as if caught in a storm. "I command you to stop," I shouted, clutching my tattooed arm as if it could enforce my will. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before the demon's laughter filled the air again, chilling and cruel.
You command nothing.
It taunted, the voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. Its form coalesced in the corner of the room, a shadowy figure, large and imposing.
You are mine to toy with as much as these pitiful objects.
Desperate, I began researching ways to break the foolish bond I had created. Nights spent poring over ancient texts and forbidden tomes turned up little that could help. The sigil was meant to bind, yes, but primarily, it was a mark of subjugation under the demon's power. I had misread the symbols, blinded by arrogance and the lust for power. My health deteriorated as the haunting escalated. Sleep became a rare commodity, each moment of rest interrupted by nightmares so vivid they seemed to bleed into reality. My dreams were filled with fire and screams, visions of other realms where torment was endless and escape was a cruel illusion. The demon seemed to feed on my fear, growing stronger as I grew weaker. It no longer confined its appearance to the shadows of my home. I began to see it in broad daylight, a figure of dread that only I could perceive, watching me from across crowded streets or reflecting in store windows, always a reminder that there was no escape from the horror I had invited into my life. It was during a particularly harrowing night, with the storm raging outside and the demon's whispers crawling under my skin, that I decided to take a drastic step. If knowledge had bound me to this nightmare, then knowledge could set me free. I needed to find the creator of the Sigil, the origin of this ancient curse. My quest led me deep into the underbelly of the occult world through contacts hidden within shadowed corners of the internet and to ancient libraries that smelled of dust and decay. Each step brought new dangers, from otherworldly entities attracted to the scent of my cursed blood to zealots who sought to harness the demon's power for themselves. My travels brought me to an old, forgotten town nestled in the cradle of towering, gnarled mountains. I was told the Sigil's creator had once resided here, a formidable power and dubious repute sorcerer. The locals spoke of him in hushed tones, fearful even to utter his name lest they draw unwelcome attention. The sorcerer's house was a decrepit mansion on the outskirts of town, abandoned and shrouded in an air of palpable dread. As I approached, the wind seemed to carry voices, whispering warnings and mournful songs from the past. The house loomed large and foreboding, its windows like dark, watching eyes. Inside, the air was thick with the musty smell of old paper and decay. The walls were lined with shelves of arcane books and artifacts, each humming with a subtle, eerie energy. In the center of the main hall, a circle of salt surrounded a pedestal upon which lay a single, thick tome, its cover black and unmarked. I approached, every instinct screaming for me to flee, but desperation drove me forward. The book was bound by a clasp depicting the sigil inked on my arm. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with diagrams and scripts in languages I barely recognized, but as I flipped through, a section caught my eye: the history of the sigil and its true purpose. The demon I had summoned was known as a malach of desolation, a spirit of chaos and destruction. The sorcerer had bound it centuries ago, not for power, but as a seal over a more profound, more ancient evil. By invoking the sigil on myself, I had unbound the demon and weakened the seal. The realization was a gut punch of despair. The demon's taunts had been cruel and distracting, keeping me from uncovering the truth sooner. With every moment of torment, it had been slowly freeing itself completely, aiming to unleash the ancient evil it once held at bay. Armed with this new knowledge, I knew what I had to do. The book outlined a ritual that, if done incorrectly, could either strengthen the seal or break it entirely. The stakes were life or death, not just for me, but potentially for the world itself. I gathered the necessary components from the sorcerer's abandoned stores: rare herbs, ritualistic tools, and a vial of ink as black as a moonless night. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within me as I drew the new sigil on the ground of the old mansion. Thunder crashed overhead, and the shadows seemed to swirl and coalesce around the room's edges as I chanted the incantations. The demon appeared as I was halfway through, its form more terrifying than ever, a swirling mass of darkness and red eyes.
Foolish mortal,
it hissed, its voice a cacophony of despair.
Do you think you can repair what you so blindly tore asunder?
I continued the chant, ignoring its words and focusing all my will on the task. The air crackled with power, and the sigil glowed intensely. The demon roared, shaking the house's foundations as it tried to stop me. But I was relentless. With the final word of the ritual spoken, a blinding flash enveloped the room. The force of the unleashed energy threw me against the wall, and darkness took me. When I awoke, the world was eerily silent. Though damaged, the storm had passed, and the house stood stubbornly amidst the debris. My body ached from the impact, but the overwhelming presence of the demon was gone. Cautiously, I rose, my limbs heavy and resistant. The sigil on the floor where I had performed the ritual was scorched into the wood, a permanent mark of the battle waged here. I stepped closer, half expecting the demon to materialize again, but there was nothing, only the faint echo of its last roar lingering in the air. Relief washed over me, mingled with a profound exhaustion. I had done it. The ritual had worked, or so I hoped. The test was the absence of the demon's torment and whether the ancient evil remained sealed. I left the mansion as the sun began to rise, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape that seemed to watch me go. Returning to town, I sought out the oldest local I could find, a woman known as Madame Alara, who was reputed to have knowledge of the town's darker histories. Her small, cluttered shop smelled of incense and old books, and her eyes, sharp and knowing, appraised me as I entered.
"You've been meddling with forces you don't understand,"
she said, without preamble. Her voice was rough, but not unkind.
"Tell me, what has brought you back from the edge of oblivion?"
I explained everything to her, from my initial, foolish summoning to the desperate ritual in the sorcerer's mansion. As I spoke, her expression grew increasingly grave.
"You have done well to repair what you could. But know this. The seal you've strengthened will not hold forever. These forces are older than the hills and more persistent than the tides. You have bought us time, but the darkness will rise again, seeking cracks in the world."
Her words chilled me, a stark reminder of the responsibility I had inadvertently taken on. "What should I do?" I asked, the weight of her implications heavy on my shoulders.
"Live," she replied simply. "Live well and be vigilant. Learn all you can about these forces. You are bound to them now, a guardian of sorts. It is a heavy burden, but one you must bear."
Leaving Madame Phoenix's shop, I felt a newfound purpose solidify. The battle might be over, but the war was just beginning. My life had irrevocably changed. No longer was I a mere observer of the supernatural. I was a participant, a defender against the darkness. As I boarded the bus to leave the town, I looked out the window at the passing scenery. The mountains stood silent and watchful as if acknowledging my departure. I settled into my seat. My eyes were heavy with the need for rest, but my mind was alert. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both known and unknown. But I was ready. After all, I had faced a demon and lived to tell the tale. Whatever lay ahead, I would meet it head-on, armed with knowledge and a resolve forged in the fires of my ordeal. Don't miss out on more thrilling adventures. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest videos.